Last week in Tel Aviv, members and supporters of the Rabbis for Human Rights organization joined a demonstration protesting against the lack of police protection for Arab citizens of Israel to keep them safe from violence and murder. In a rather macabre gesture, the demonstrators carried with them coffins carrying the names of the 140 Arab citizens of Israel murdered so far this year. Families brought pictures of the loved ones for whom they grieve. For decades, the Arab villages in Israel have not had their fair share of public services or infrastructure spending. And under the present Israeli government, the problem is becoming worse. In a powerful Devar Torah on last week's portion, Rabbi Lana Silberman Soloway picked up the title of the section called Re'eh, See, and asked people to open their eyes and to look around, to see all the people who live among us whose basic rights are being taken away from them every day, to see the Palestinian people in East Jerusalem, the West Bank and Gaza, to see the refugees, the asylum seekers, the women, the LGBTQ, the poor, the handicapped, to see all who are different from us one way or the other and truly hear them, to hear the plea of hundreds of other Palestinian families in East Jerusalem who are waiting to be expelled from their home or for their home to be demolished, to hear the Palestinian farmers that are suffering daily violence from settlers, to hear the cry of the Arab society in Israel that can no longer handle the terrible domestic and criminal violence on their own, to hear all those who cannot keep their heads above water due to the high cost of living, to hear all those who go out onto the streets to fight for democracy, to hear and see every single person who makes up the mosaic in the entire Israeli society, from the Jordan River to the sea. That last phrase is a very loaded one. From the river to the sea has long been a slogan used to support Palestinian liberation, but Rabbi Lana has reclaimed the slogan to support Israeli freedoms too. The huge size of the weekly demonstrations in Tel Aviv and across the country show that hundreds of thousands of ordinary Israelis feel their democracy and their rights are under attack from their own government. And though these demonstrations may have faded from the headlines, they are going on the whole time, especially on Saturday nights, every Saturday night in Tel Aviv and other towns across Israel. I've recently returned from the Jewish Christian Bible Study Week in Germany, and there I was talking to Dr. Moshe Lavi, a former lecturer at Liabeck College, and now a founder of a new program in Haifa on the digital humanities. He and his family have been taking part in the demonstrations in Israel from the outset. I asked him how it was that such a far-right government could get elected in Israel when they seem to have so little support. He replied that people are demoralized, and when they're demoralized, they don't bother to vote. But now, at last, they're raising their voices, and we need to support them. We need to support them. We need to support them, not just because of their struggle for a fairer, more just society, but because progressive Judaism and our own progressive values are under attack in Israel, and therefore their cause is our cause, and our cause should be their cause. We have here in the UK a British Friends of the Rabbis for Human Rights, in which Rabbi Alex, Rabbi Danny Rich, and others of us have been involved over the years. But it's a very small organization, and we need a louder voice. This week's Sefer Shoftim proclaims the famous words, Tzedek, Tzedek Tirdov, often translated as justice, justice you shall pursue. But tzedek actually is a wider term than justice. It means all kinds of righteous behavior. And this idea runs like a golden thread through the reading. The system of government envisaged in Deuteronomy was clearly one with checks and balances within it, not so very different from those used by nation states today, as we saw at the coronation. The power of the judges was constrained by the law, and their authority had to be recognized. Bribery was strictly prohibited. And he goes on to tell us, as we've heard, that even the power of the monarch was constrained. Not too much wealth, because that would mean high taxes. Not too many horses, because that would mean a large army. And not too many wives, because that would mean a huge and expensive court. Instead, there was complete subjugation to the words of Torah, which the king had to read and to write. The religious authorities, too, they had limited powers. The Levites and priests were entirely dependent on tithes, those offerings, which were really taxes from other people. So even the temple could not operate without consent. Prophets, too, had a place in the society mentioned in our Torah reading. To prophets, we can compare the importance and power of the media in our own time. And the Torah talks about the difference between a false prophet and a true prophet, just as we talk about the distinction between fake news and true. And then we learn that someone who slays a human being accidentally has to have places to run off to safely, that innocent blood must not be shed, that boundary markers must not be moved, that at least 2 witnesses are required in a trial. And there are even laws about the limitations of enlisting troops for a war in which fruit trees must not be cut down. All that and more is in the whole of this week's portion, which ends with the importance of burying an unknown body found in open country. Even the unknown person, the unknown dead person, has rights. Now, we're used to the rules of an orderly society, but for the time of King Josiah, who ruled from 640 to 609 BCE in the kingdom of Judah, when this was probably written, all this is really quite astonishing. And how then upsetting to feel that the religious parties who are very much in control of the present Israeli government don't appear to have read it. Well, of course they have read it, and I'm sure they've studied it in great detail. But perhaps occasionally they look at the detail, but they neglect the underlying moral principles which are so dear to our kind of Judaism. Now, as Rabbi Alex mentioned, this really important month of Elul has just begun. And I like to think of it as the beginning not just of a month, but of a period of 7 weeks. 7 weeks of self-examination and repentance, taking us from now right through to Simchat Torah. It's actually, I think, the third period of 7 weeks in the spring and summer of the Jewish calendar. First of all, the 7 weeks from Pesach to Shavuot, which we call the Omer, from liberation in Egypt to Torah at Sinai. Then, the 7 weeks of consolation from Tisha B'Av to Rosh Hashanah. And this third period, which overlaps with the second one and starts now. And this third period, those who follow the discipline of Musar, that study discipline, call it the time of Cheshbon Nefesh, self-accounting, when we consider the mistakes we've made and the value of our lives. In considering what's happening in Israel, and in general at this time, it's important that we do not use this period of the year to point the finger of blame at others, because it is a time of year which teaches very strongly the lesson that we are all responsible. We are all part of the community of Israel. We all rejoice in its blessings and grieve at its failures. May this Shabbat help us to bring back the notion of careful government, as proclaimed in this section of the Torah, to the debate. And may Jerusalem today become like the Jerusalem envisaged by the prophet Isaiah, a city of peace and salvation, a city that the nations of the world wish to praise rather than blame. As he said, Kol sofaich, nasu kol yachtav yoranenu, ki ayin ba'ayin yiru, b'shuv Adonai Tzion. The voice of your lookouts, they lift up the voice. Together they sing. From eye to eye they see, as the Eternal returns to Zion. Shabbat Shalom.